Abortion was a major issue in the recent US elections. Supreme Court judges appointed by Donald Trump in his first administration had overturned the Roe v. Wade decision that effectively legalized abortion in America. Millions of women were hoping that a win by Kamala Harris would reverse the process. In the end, of course, Trump won. But so did abortion rights in a number of states where local referendums were held. Meanwhile, sections of the right in Australia have had abortion rights in their sights, in South Australia, Queensland, and to some extent nationally. Why is the right fixated on controlling women's bodies? How can we roll back their attacks? And what will it take for women to gain liberation and genuine control over their own bodies? To help work through these questions, we're joined by Judy McVey, author of the Solidarity pamphlet, Abortion, the Fight That's Still to Be Won. You're listening to The Sound of Solidarity, brought to you by Solidarity. We're a revolutionary socialist group in Australia, and if you'd like to find out more about us, our website is solidarity.net.au. I'm David Glanz, and I'm recording this episode on unceded Wurundjeri land in Naarm, or Melbourne. So welcome, Judy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, well, let's have an overview. Take us through the attacks on abortion rights here and in the US. What's at stake?
Okay, well, over 70 million people ended up voting for Donald Trump, and some 44% of women voters chose him to enter the White House. This has led to a crisis amongst a lot of women. I mean, some women who voted for Trump or thought he was better than Kamala Harris said, well, maybe he'll shake things up and they'll have to have change. Other people are really, really concerned. The abortion movement in America is organising to what used to be called mutual support, to set up their own way of providing abortion services where they're lacking in certain states, and to support women in whatever they need, whether it be abortion pills, contraception, or access to surgical abortions. So voting for Democrat Kamala Harris wasn't a mechanism to ensure a better life for women, unfortunately. People are starting to recognise that across the board. Trump's victory is a roaring success for all the vile sexists who think women's true role is in the home, baking bread and birthing children. Obviously, people are much more concerned in terms of who they vote for president, in terms of the cost of living and the kind of poly-crisis that we're all going through. If you're talking about abortion, in the short term, women are targets of extreme restrictions on their access to basic abortion care in some states. Bans mean maternal deaths are on the rise. So the rate of maternal mortality cases in Texas rose by 56% between 2019 and 2022, compared with just 11% nationwide, according to analysis by the Gender Equity Policy Institute. All the research points to Texas abortion bans as the primary driver of this alarming increase. There's going to be more deaths in states where abortion is banned. This is the cost that people are facing. 2 women in Georgia recently died unable to access abortion care, Candy Miller and Amber Nicole Thurman. Jocely Barnaker in Texas was 17 weeks pregnant, was unable to get a treatment for her miscarriage after waiting 40 hours, unable to get abortion services. According to a new study published in JAMA Pediatrics, also, it's infant mortality that's on the rise as more women are forced to carry dangerous pregnancies and forced into experiences like this one. In Florida, a woman found out from a scan at 23 weeks that her fetus had severe abnormalities. The doctor told her it would not survive long beyond birth. Her life was threatened. Florida has a ban on abortion after 6 weeks gestation. The woman was forced to continue, and at 37 weeks, she gave birth to a son. So she put him on her chest, and he took his first and last breath there. He was only alive for 94 minutes. So this is a horrible, horrible experience for women to go through. We do have a potential fascist movement growing in America, as people have argued. And This could mean the destruction of working class organisations and democratic institutions. The attacks on abortion rights, the attacks on women, the misogyny is all part of the far-right agenda. In America, there's an organisation called the Heritage Foundation that came up with this thing called the Project 2025, which they see as a blueprint for what Donald Trump and his allies should be doing now that they've got control of the White House. And Donald Trump's name appears at least 300 times in the Project 2025, so he's implicated. And that plan would mean further attacks on abortion rights, but also, it's not just surgical abortions. There are 3 attorneys general in Kansas, Missouri and Idaho who are seeking to make abortion medication illegal for minors entirely and targeting shield state abortion providers who've been able to ship abortion medication to the states, to people in the states where there are bans. They want to stop the mailing of abortion drugs in the postal system in America. They're actually covered by a law, a 150-year-old law called the Comstock Act, which was designed to stop dangerous medicines, materials, equipment, and also, of course, books and pornography. It can be used to actually stop the sending of medicines to women who are in states where they cannot access a doctor who can prescribe abortion medication. They're also trying to stop the way abortion medication is used. In America, you can use abortion medication in the first 10 weeks of a pregnancy. They want to change that to 7 weeks to limit women's ability to use it. While it's true, under Roe versus Wade, women had the right, nationally, women had the right to abortion, but there are always restrictions there. So the abortion movement in America wants something better than Roe versus Wade, obviously. Some people want free abortion on demand, but others want at least abortion access to anybody who needs it. Current situation is likely to change. At the moment, there are 9 states plus the District of Columbia that allows abortion and do not restrict it on the basis of gestational duration. But there are 41 states with bans. Some 13 have total bans and 28 have gestational limits. So 8 states ban abortion at or before 18 weeks gestation, and 20 states ban abortion at some point after 18 weeks. This is likely to get worse under a Trump presidency. In Australia, we've got politicians who are wannabe Trumps. There's an anti-abortion movement that sees itself using the same playbook as Trump. But in Australia, we have decriminalised abortion in every state and territory. So you cannot be refused an abortion at least in the first trimester, and it's longer in some states than others. It's different across the states. But anti-abortion activists always focus on trying to chip away and undermine even our decriminalised situation in Australia. They also chip away at access and try to undermine women's right to access abortion even if it was legal. So there's often doctors who claim that they are conscientiously objecting to abortions, but they're supposed to refer you to other abortion doctors who will do the abortion. There are definite weaknesses in the Australian situation, which we can talk in more detail about. But in Australia, it is unlikely that at the next federal election, which is coming up by May 2025, it's unlikely that we'll see abortion, a threat to abortion law. We saw an attempt by anti-abortionists in South Australia to change a law there. It was defeated by 9 votes to 10. They wanted to force women to have to give birth at 27 weeks gestation. This is a very dangerous thing to force women to have early pregnancies, to induce a woman into an early pregnancy. That was defeated, but very narrowly. But it was only the upper house in South Australia. In Queensland, the Katter anti-abortion Robbie Katter, who's in Katter's Australian party, he's threatened to move a bill that would overturn the law in Queensland, so make abortion illegal again in Queensland. He also likes the idea of forcing women to give birth early rather than have an abortion. Now, they take these ideas from America where there are some states that are trying to force women, instead of having an abortion, if you're threatened by your pregnancy, instead of having an abortion, no one needs an abortion because you can have a caesarean, or you can be forced to have an early pregnancy. So these
when you say early pregnancy, you mean early childbirth, don't you?
Sorry, early childbirth. Yes. They can force women to have an early childbirth rather than have an abortion because they want to remove the whole idea that abortion is even a thing anymore. Okay, so in Australia, decriminalisation means it's unlikely that our laws are going to change soon. But there are anti-abortionists who are supported by the Catholic Church and supported by other wealthy anti-abortionists or people attempting to set up far-right organisations in Australia. So we have to be vigilant. In the Queensland election, when Katter's proposal came up, the Liberal Party was not clear how they would approach that. The majority of MPs of the Liberal National Party in Queensland voted against decriminalisation in Queensland 2018. The MPs that went to the election refused to say which way they would vote if Katter proposed recriminalisation of abortion in Queensland. The interesting thing was this cost the LNP, the Liberal National Party, votes. It's a dangerous thing to challenge the abortion laws that have been so successful in Australia and in a country where polls show consistently that 80% of the population support the right of women to have an abortion. It is unlikely that this will succeed in the short term. However, as I say, we have to be vigilant because they can chip away. And we can talk about there's lots of problems with accessing abortion in Australia.
Okay, we'll come back and talk about Australia a little bit further on. But just back to the US. Would Kamala Harris have reinstated national abortion rights if she'd won? And if you think that was always unlikely, how can abortion rights be won back?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris positioned herself as a reproduction rights candidate. She's vowing to restore reproductive freedoms, and she got endorsements from, the major pro-abortion organisations like Planned Parenthood, Action Fund, Committee to Protect Healthcare, Reproduction Freedom for All, etc. What she was promising was to support a bill that restored the protections of the Roe versus Wade situation. And she also promised to veto any national abortion ban that was proposed in Congress. So the president is stuck in the situation. Congress has to come up with legislation and she's prepared to support it. And that was it. The American Civil Liberties Union have said that not only should abortion be codified and bans, opposed, but also the Democrats need to end the discriminatory barriers to abortion care, such as insurance coverage bans like the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment stopped any woman who has an abortion from getting any Medicaid, which is like Medicare. I mean, it's limited anyway in America. But the Hyde Amendment, which was supported by Joe Biden, by the way, back in the day, stopped that. Now, the Democrats in the last 2 years have had control of Congress. They've had a majority in the lower house, in the House of Representatives, and in the Senate. And the Democrats did not move a motion to support abortion rights. So how can we trust that Kamala Harris would do this or would be able to organise this through the Democrats if she had won the presidency? The outcome of the election is also that now the Republicans have a majority in both houses. So we'll never see it tested whether or not Kamala Harris would support those abortion rights. Can't see why she wouldn't try to strengthen abortion rights in America, but the track record is that she hasn't done enough in the 4 years that she was vice president.
As I mentioned in the introduction, voters voted on propositions in 10 states. So there's this process of essentially state-level referendums that can take place at the same time as a presidential and congressional election. And there were votes on abortion rights propositions in 10 states. So what do the results tell us?
This is interesting. One of the Democrat strategies for the midterm elections 2 years ago was to support having these ballots, and they succeeded. And that actually led to a bigger vote for the Democrats. That's how they won a majority in both houses. That plan didn't work this time, did it? For some reason, a majority of people were against the Democrats winning the White House, but they came out in droves to support these ballots for better abortion rights. Okay, in 7 of the 10 ballots that were held, existing abortion rulings were actually enshrined into law, into the Constitution, or they were improved. And there were a number of significant victories. The most important states are the 5: Arizona, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, but also Florida. In Arizona, 62% supported, defending abortion as a right in the Constitution. Also Missouri. Missouri had been the first state to ban abortions, and now it became a state to get rid of the ban on abortions. Montana supported abortion in the Constitution as well. And Nevada supported abortion in the Constitution. However, it's got to be confirmed in 2026 for some reason. Florida, 57% supported abortion rights in Florida. But in Florida, which is dominated by Republicans, DeSantis is the governor, there's a threshold of 60%. You had to get 60% of the vote or the ballot to win. So they failed in Florida. In other states, in Colorado, 62% wanted to guarantee funding for abortion. In New York, 62% chose to strengthen laws and strengthen anti-discrimination. Maryland strengthened existing abortion laws, and also including strengthening access to birth control, which is important. In Nebraska, they supported banning abortion and rejected a proposal to extend abortion rights. South Dakota opposed abortion rights. So it was mixed. However, what it does show, it reinforces the polling in America as well, where up to 80% support women's right to abortion. 7 states had already held abortion-related ballot referendums, and they all won, including J.D. Vance's state, where a ban on abortion when you could hear a heartbeat, a fetus's heartbeat, so as early as from 6 weeks pregnancy, that was the ban, the nature of the ban in Ohio. That was defeated in a ballot just before the election. So what that indicates is that people went out to support abortion rights thinking that these ballots were the most important thing. And because for other reasons, there's a whole range of reasons why you'd support a certain presidential candidate, they ended up supporting or opposing the Democrats, really. I don't think they necessarily supported Donald Trump, but they opposed the kind of world that the Democrats had built in the last 4 years of the presidency of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's weakness in differentiating herself from that. What we've got is a very strong, continuing strong support for abortion rights in America, which could be utilised by a political campaign to force the government to listen to people who are demanding abortion rights. Obviously, in the 1970s, the Roe versus Wade outcome in the Supreme Court was a result of mass protest. It wasn't the result of, do-gooders in the Supreme Court. Even though the Supreme Court now has a much worse composition, the important thing is on the ground, the power of people to force their rulers to make changes.
As you've outlined, and you've given us a number of statistics, abortion rights are very popular, well supported both here and in the US. So why is there this constant drive for politicians to raise barriers to women who choose to have an abortion? And why is the right fixated on controlling women's bodies?
Yeah, I suppose it's easier to answer the question about the right, because right-wing Christian principles about gender roles and the sanctity of life always focus on the right to life of children and the fetus, and that life begins at conception. So conservative Christians adhere to that. This is overlapping with ideologies of the far right about gender roles, who want a society where it's clear on your gender, men and women, and that's all you have. There are no homosexuals. And that overlaps with fascist ideas about women's place, which, Hitler famously summed up in the words Kinder, Kirche, Küche, children, church and kitchen. The place for women for the far right and for right-wing Christians is in the home raising children, not in the workplace and not having any kind of professional or career. So this issue has been weaponised by the far right, and there's a strategy to attract an audience across all different right-wing groups to support anti-abortion as a mobilising demand for evangelical Christians, far right, the religious right, and it's been successful not only in America but across Europe. Capitalism wants a much more flexible idea about women's role. These ideas now seem out of date because women were needed to fill wartime jobs and labour shortages since the Second World War. Women have increased their role in the workplace. Women have increased their role in many places, and this has benefited capitalism. So women, under liberal ideas, women can do a lot more than just have babies and care for people. However, it's contradictory because under capitalism, they want their cake and eat it too. The traditional family was promoted to ensure the reproduction of the labour force cheaply, and abortion restrictions were actually brought in under capitalism and codified in laws to become a discipline on women workers. So at the moment, capitalism keeps this balance, and as the economic crisis deepens, they are shifting to support more right-wing ideas and adopting right-wing ideas about women. The misogyny is part of an idea that women should be, yes, we want them in the workplace, but we also want them to be carrying out unpaid labour to reproduce the labour force for the workforce, not just being workers. And women more and more have had to take it on the role as the capitalist economic crisis has deepened. Women have played the role. We saw it mostly through the COVID years. Women are the chief carers in this society. They should be caring for children and caring for older people. They are the carers in the family. So you've got a situation where we need abortion rights so that women are able to go to work and have control of their lives to the extent that they can become useful labour force. But at the same time, they have to provide the next generation of workers for the capitalist system.
Abortion was illegal for a long time. So let's just focus on Australia for now, because this is a big question. Tell us how women fought and won the right to choose, limited as it may be, but nonetheless, how was that victory won?
Okay, the most important word is struggle. A struggle in many forms. Women rejected the idea that they shouldn't have the right to control their own bodies. So women's autonomy became a key issue for feminists and for all women. In Australia, the movement for abortion rights really got going in the 50s. Civil libertarians, doctors and feminists all challenged the laws. There were two ways that change came about initially, and then there was a need to protect the change. So in South Australia, civil libertarians actually succeeded in reforming the law based on British legal concepts that not all abortions are illegal. Abortion could be lawful if it was necessary to save the life of a woman or to protect their physical health, and in the case of incest, not rape as well. In Victoria, a different strategy was taken because the parliaments, which were controlled by Liberal Party members, and the Labor Party had a strong anti-abortion section as well with the Catholic members of Parliament. So legal reform wasn't possible. What they did was abortion doctors tested the law, conducted abortions, publicised it, and challenged the law to jail them or whatever, because you could get life in jail for abortion. And what happened was the judges, in this case, came to the same conclusion as the South Australian legal people, which was that abortion can be lawful if carried out for the sake of the woman's life or health. And testing the law was followed up also in New South Wales. Now, there are still restrictions on abortion, but it was found that women could get abortions quite easily in South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales. In other states, people could see if they travelled to these states, they could get abortions. There was this movement of mutual support that we see across America today. This was happening in Australia. At the same time, there were other issues that affected women, and the women's liberation movement got going. They were inspired by the women's liberation movement in America, but also set up in Australia by about 1969. Now, they were a very radical movement. The ideas came from socialists as well as radical feminists, and they actually saw their role as defending women's right to abortion as one of the key issues for women. There are other issues like winning childcare and the right to work in various places, etc. But abortion became a key issue. And they supported militantly on the streets women who were nurses and doctors who were doing abortions. And they made it a huge issue with militant rallies and demonstrations, big debates, public debates. So the idea that you could get an abortion and this would be protected by the law under certain circumstances, so long as your doctor said that you need the abortion for the sake of your health, it became broader than just your medical situation to also incorporate your social situation, whether the abortion would damage your whole family life. This worked for a while. And this was actually successful largely because in the 70s in Australia, there was a broad movement for change. The Australian working class had won back the right to strike in 1969, and social movements fighting against racism, as well as women's liberation, union rights, the environment, a whole range of issues came together, and they reinforced each other so that people had a social power that was unusual in Australian society. This actually built stronger union struggles, and that's important because by the end of the 70s, the movement was starting to decline, and there was a move amongst right-wing politicians to actually attack these abortion rights. When Whitlam came to power in 1972, he brought in Medicare, which is a universal medical insurance scheme. It wasn't like the free health service in Britain, but universal health insurance. So abortion, if it was legal, which was in some states, could attract the Medicare rebate. In 1979, right-wing Liberal politician decided to try to remove that, but he was defeated. In defeating that, it was established that abortion must be legal because you could only get the Medicare rebate if the abortion was legal, for legal health care, and abortion was mentioned on the Medibank schedules. So that was defeated. That indicated women could continue to have this right to abortion. In 1980, the Queensland National Party leader, Bjelke Petersen, who's a well-known right-wing anti-woman, anti-gay, anti-union, anti-everything, he decided he was going to strengthen the anti-abortion laws in Queensland, make it even harder for women to get abortions and to stop women travelling from Queensland to interstate. There was a campaign immediately, and in this case, the Trade and Labour Council actually supported the campaign for abortion rights. A number of unions supported it, and it became a social issue that was supported very broadly, such that sections of the Liberal Party even supported it. And that attack on abortion rights was roundly defeated in Queensland in 1980. By 1981, the ACTU adopted, in a close vote, but ACTU adopted a position that said that women did have the right to abortion and to decide for themselves whether to have children and when to have children. So it's quite clear that winning abortion rights benefited from the role of the trade union movement in taking up this issue, amongst other issues, but taking up this issue strongly. And to achieve that, women, feminists, socialists, actually used their unions to campaign. So I was in the Clerical Officers Association, which is now the CPSU, the Community and Public Sector Union. And in that union, we moved motions throughout. It's a national union. In every state, we moved motions saying that the union should support abortion rights, and we won. And I think that happened in a number of other unions as well. The important thing there is that the issue succeeded largely because it became an issue. Like today, was winning support, probably not 80%, maybe 60%, winning support across society, and the movement was able to use that to defend the situation of abortion legality. Very tenuous abortion legality, depending on the courts and everything, but still, women were getting abortions, and this continued to be the case right up until the decriminalisation processes of the late 1990s. Again, this was tested in Queensland in 1975, and the Queensland government ended up backing off. They raided an abortion clinic in Greenslopes, but they were forced to back off so that even in Queensland, abortion was legal and there were clinics that operated. Now, the situation in Australia continued to be a struggle, but the decriminalisation process that happened has made it clear that abortion at the request of the woman is legal up to a certain gestation period, which is different in each state, but at least for the first trimester. Only in the Australian Capital Territory, the ACT, have all the rules and regulations dealing with control over the woman's decision. They've been eliminated only in the ACT, where it only comes under the Health Act. So that if you want an abortion in the ACT, it's your decision right up until the pregnancy finishes. And that became law in 2002. In the ACT as well, they've recently made it free to have an abortion in the first 16 weeks of the pregnancy. So what we've got in Australia is a situation where it's different in each state, but there is consistency in that it's established that women have the right to decide on abortion up to a certain gestation period, and after that, yes, they have to get the approval of doctors or specialists.
So that's an inspiring story of struggle, but having formal rights and being able to exercise them are not always the same thing. So can you take us through what are the practical barriers in Australia to women accessing abortions today? So they may have the right, but do they actually have the opportunity?
Yes, this is probably the most important point we have to make about abortion, and probably a whole range of other issues as well. You may have the right to access an abortion in Australia, but trying to get an abortion can be very, very difficult. Victoria is supposedly a leader in reproductive health care access, and recently, though, the Women's Health Victoria released a report called Realising Access, which echoed a Senate inquiry. The Senate inquiry had said that Australians do not have consistent access to sexual, reproductive and maternal health care, particularly in regional and remote areas. That Senate inquiry took place in 2023. In Victoria now, it's assessed that across the state, 2/3 of LGAs, local government areas, have no surgical abortion providers. 39% have no medication abortion dispensing pharmacies. So you can't get abortion medication in a pharmacy in 39% of Victoria. And medication abortion prescribers, there's only 19% across Victoria. So you can see that most of the problem's going to be in the rural areas. A friend of mine told me that west of Ballarat, you couldn't get an abortion if you tried. So the other problem is that because there's delays finding an abortion doctor, etc., the easiest way to have an abortion is to have it early. Before 9 weeks, you can have the abortion pills. But if you miss out on, if time passes and you can't get an abortion pill by 9 weeks, then you're forced into surgical abortions, which are harder to attain. So in Victoria, the delays have meant that the demand for abortion past 9 weeks have increased, but the resources to provide those abortions has decreased. In New South Wales recently, we had a different situation where in Queanbeyan and Orange, the hospitals actually were refusing to provide abortions. One hospital said you can only have an abortion if it's for a medical reason, i.e. you have to get doctor's approvals. It wasn't up to the woman to decide. Now that the state government was alerted by a report from the ABC, who reported on accusations about these two hospitals refusing to provide abortions, and the state government actually intervened to reverse the decision. So that was a good outcome, but it shouldn't have happened in the first place. In Queensland, even though the Labor government campaigned strongly for abortion rights in the recent election, they have refused to invest the necessary funds in healthcare to make abortion accessible throughout the state. And start to see this pattern where we've got a crisis in healthcare anyway, as has been well reported in the media. But abortion is seen as some kind of luxury and less important than other healthcare. And it seems to be one of the procedures that is being refused by certain hospitals. At the same time, we do see some hospitals, particularly run by Catholics, who do not support abortion. So there's two hospitals in Victoria, the Mercy and St Vincent's. that have a policy of not allowing abortions to be done in their hospitals. Now, the Labor government should be doing something about this, and the Greens have raised it as a demand that if you get hospital funding, you should provide the full range of reproductive services. This used to be Labor Party policy before the 2019 election, but it was dumped by Albanese in 2022. So we've got a situation where hospitals aren't getting enough funding, but hospitals can actually avoid providing essential reproductive care, not being slapped on the wrist or anything. What the health minister has said, he said, we've been doing good stuff getting more abortion medication, the RU46, the abortion pills. We've been getting those out much more widely. It's up to the state governments to decide on what happens with surgery. So the key thing is whether it's physical access to abortion. It depends on your postcode where you live in Australia, and even though there's some consistency about the laws, and there could be consistency about health funding provided by the federal government, it's up to the state governments to decide whether or not they will take a strong stand and force the hospitals that they actually run to provide reproductive services.
Thanks so much for taking us through all of this. I want to close with a huge question, but maybe a brief answer, that we need to fight all these battles, but ultimately we want to win the war. So, in summing up, what's the socialist vision for women's liberation?
Okay, well, if we look at what capitalism is all about, it wants women to shoulder the cost of social reproduction of labour, as we said before. So we have to look at where we have power to make these changes. We can learn from the 1970s that we had the power to change things in working class struggle. So our allies are other workers of all genders. Our families benefit from having more rights to decide when and if to have children, and better wages and conditions. And working men are not the enemy, but also all workers benefit from the end of women's oppression, not only the removing of strict gender constructs. We have to recognise that our enemy relies on us for those profits, and that gives us power to unite to struggle against the system for our rights today. But also, if you look at history, whether it's the Russian Revolution of 1917 or more recent revolutions around the world, when people start to fight back around a range of questions, women's oppression often comes to the fore. So in Argentina in 2020, they started a process of winning social rights, and that included challenging women's oppression as they fought to win healthcare, and they succeeded. They succeeded in winning free, safe abortion paid for by the health department. So how do we get to that kind of mass struggle that's needed? The protest today is useful to expose the weaknesses of the system, and it works to build consciousness and to build a movement. To fight and win women's liberation, it's connected to the struggle for genuine socialism. We can build new ways to create our society anew, relying on resources of society and not the backbreaking, brutal burdens of unpaid carers. We do live in a wealthy society already, but that wealth's in the hands of a tiny 1% at the top of society. That wealth must be taken for human need and not for profit. So the subsidies for fossil fuel companies that we see today, the billions spent on war machines against the Palestinians, the AUKUS alliance that costs billions of dollars to create nuclear submarines and targets fake enemies. We workers have no interest in a war with China, but we need our healthcare now. Our fight is the same around the world, and our allies are the workers of the world. It's a socialist society, and there cannot be any socialism, though, without women's liberation. And the reverse is true. There will be no women's liberation without socialism.
Okay, that's a fantastic note to finish on. Thank you very much, Judy.
Thank you. That was great.